Yes, we heard you. Yes, we didn't provide any coverage for the X50, but we've got it now. Now, the biggest reason Proton is claiming that the new X50 is all new is that because under the bonnet, gone is the 1.5 litre turbocharged 3-cylinder. Now there is a turbocharged 4-cylinder, which they're dubbing the Intelligent Green Technology Engine, or IGT. Now, compared to the outgoing TGDI or turbo gasoline direct injection engine, this produces about 6-ish horsepower and about 40 Newton meters more than the outgoing model. But more importantly, this is now the standard engine across the entirety of the X50 lineup, which means that compared to before on the executive and premium models, this is now significantly more powerful than the outgoing non-direct injection vehicle. Now, of course, beyond that, the next significant update is obviously to this car's aesthetics, because on the front, everything from the A-pillar forward is brand new sheet metal, which makes this car look a lot fresher compared to the vehicle that was introduced quite some time ago. So up front, we now get new LED headlights. The projectors have gone, replaced with reflector LED units instead, but we now get a 3-dash daytime running light and indicator signal or indicator design, which is very similar to what we've seen before from the Proton S70. I suspect that this is now going to be a signature for new Proton models. Now, the infinite weave grille has also been given a slight revision, but I don't understand why it's called the infinite weave, because the weave is gone. The Songket inspired pins are there though, although they're really stretching it at this point. But the ethereal bow, however, remains here. So at least we've got that going for us. Moving further down, the more aggressive lower bumper has been replaced by this very wide, very prominent and bold opening. Now, this is framed with this piece of silver trim that goes all the way around, plus these slats that go all the way across, even though the opening is only in the middle. Now, if you ask me, the front end treatment of the new X50 seems to be significantly less aggressive than the outgoing model. They seem to be going for this slightly more pared back, toned down, more elegant-ish sort of look to it, which I think is all right, but there are going to be some people who prefer the more aggressive face of the outgoing model. One update or aesthetic change to the front that I cannot stand, however, are these vents up here on the bonnet. These are plastic, there is zero opening, and in fact, even underneath this plastic molding, there's nothing there either. This is utterly pointless and completely hideous on a car that isn't really all that powerful anyway. Nobody asked for these. I don't want them. Just get rid of it. Now, down the side, the changes are a little bit more minimal, because as I mentioned, the fenders are brand new, so now the chrome trim, instead of going over the top, is just on the bottom, and it stretches here into the base of the A-pillar, just like on the S70. Rolling stock has also been updated. They are still the same size, 18-inch alloys, but they are wrapped now in ultra contact tires from Continental, and more importantly, the design of the alloy wheel has also been updated. There is this strange sort of trim on the side here, which is part of the alloy wheel design on top of this diamond cut face, and I do think that it makes the alloy wheels look more interesting than they otherwise would have been. So I think that's a pretty good choice. Now, moving further down the side, the metalwork, notably for the doors, remain exactly the same, but they have updated the trim down here, because now there's another fake vent on the passenger door. I don't understand what Proton's obsession is with these fake vents. We also get red painted brake calipers on this flagship model, and you also get this slightly more aggressive roof spoiler up here with an S badge. This is reserved for the flagship model, so in case you see another S70 with a similar sort of paint scheme but doesn't have this spoiler, then that's just a premium, not a flagship. The back end of the X50 also sees pretty significant revision. So now you can see this dual level spoiler with a little bit more detail, and it even comes with a actual carbon fiber inspired texture to the top and bottom, which I think is an interesting attention to detail. But anyway, moving further down, that's where the bigger news is, because now we have full LED taillights replete with an LED light bar. We also get the beveled Proton script that we first saw from the X90, followed by the S70. And moving further down, we also get the silver trim here, which matches the L-shaped silver trim on the front bumper. So there's a nice cohesion to this design. We still get quad exhaust pipes though, which at least now mate up to a 4-cylinder engine. So at least it's slightly less comical. But one thing that I do find very interesting about this design, and I know it's going to be very, very nerdy, is the number plate holder, because this panel here is already enough to house a number plate holder, but instead they've got this nondescript looking item. I think this might be Proton trying to prevent dealers from fitting their own plate holders instead. Perhaps. Now, the other thing that is now standard on the X50, which used to be a cost option, is the powered tailgate. For those of you who may not be aware, the X50 never actually came with a powered tailgate as standard. You used to have to pay a small extra at the dealer in order to have it fitted, but now it comes as standard with the car, which is great because it also means it's covered via the car's warranty. In terms of boot space, there has been zero change to this car, which means that you still get a pretty decent amount of space with a pretty decent load lip as well. Verticality is not bad. You can probably fit like a Coleman cooler in here without too much issue. And underneath this boot floor, you will find some emergency repair kits, as well as underneath this piece of styrofoam, a space saver spare wheel, which means that for those who do intend to travel longer distances and may run into trouble, you are at least able to save yourself rather than simply rely on Proton roadside assist. Now, of course, if the space back here is inadequate, you can fold the rear seat 60-40, at which point they do fold completely flat with no ridge, which means that it's even easier to load larger items into this car without too much hassle at all. This is all pretty positive, which is what you'd expect from what Proton is claiming to be Malaysia's #1 B-segment SUV. Please don't play that song. However, I think that the best part of the new X50 is certainly this interior, because it has been completely reworked over the outgoing model, and most notably, it is not shared with any Geely model available internationally, which means that this is a totally Proton affair. The color scheme in this car has been inverted, where instead you had a red dash top, now you have a red bottom, where a lot of it is now done up in black in order to make this car feel a little bit more hemmed in, a little bit more sporty. That's certainly very nice to see. We've also lost the gear selector here, which has been replaced with a stalk, just like the Proton EMA 7, in order to make way for a wireless charging pad, as well as a new bank of buttons here. I do actually think that this setup is pretty nice. Now, up ahead, this has also been nicked from the Proton EMAS because it's a 15.6-inch central touchscreen running Acotech software, but notably, the quality of this screen is not quite as nice as what you get from an EMAS instead. That runs a 2.4K screen. This is more of a full HD affair. This instrument cluster, however, is shared with the EMAS, and in terms of the overall design and layout, it is legible enough. However, my slightly older videographer has complained that the fonts on this are slightly small, and I do believe that could be a problem for certain users, and I think that's something that could be very easily fixed by a software update. Now, talking about software, I would like to point out the fact that this is actually Proton's first model to be launched with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Not an update, don't have to wait for it, it's already here. It works great with my Android device, and it also works very well with iPhones according to our testing. It does set up wirelessly quite easily, but it doesn't seem to link automatically, which means you still need to press a couple of buttons before you set off, but the process is generally quite painless. Now, one thing that I don't like is that the majority of the controls are now in this screen. Drive mode selection is in there, auto hold is in there, light controls is in there, which means that if, heaven forbid, you end up with a frozen screen, good luck. Now, as we move further down, now that the gear selector has been removed, this floating central space is now even bigger and able to accommodate even more stuff. We've got a couple of power outlets as well as a decently sized center console bin. However, this is not air conditioned, which means that you can't cool stuff. You've got a decently sized glove box here, decently sized door bins, and that soft touch material actually extends onto the door cards, which is certainly nice to see. Dash top is nice and soft. All of this is also nice and soft. It's only down here where it starts to get a bit stiff. Now, we also get ambient lighting on the dash. That's great, but I'd like to move on to the seats. Now, in the X50, even in this flagship model, you only get a powered driver's seat, not a powered passenger seat, and we still don't get ventilation. More irritatingly, they still haven't fixed the fact that this seat is only height adjustable and not angle adjustable, which means that it is quite difficult to get a comfortable driving position in order to provide adequate under-thigh support. More annoyingly, the steering wheel doesn't adjust as much as I would like to, because as it's sat here, I would prefer the steering wheel to be about here rather than here, because as you can see, my arms are overextended. It should be here instead. In any case, these are all ergonomic issues that have generally existed from the outgoing model, so I suspect there are some things that they can't change, but they have listened to feedback, and now the door handles are apparently more solid and less likely to break. What also hasn't changed is the space back here. With the front seat set up in my driving position, about 170 centimeters, I have about that much knee room and a pretty good amount of headroom despite the standard fit panoramic sunroof with an electric sunblind, which means that in terms of practicality, it really isn't all that bad. More importantly, because this car is not electric, I do have decently sized footwells, which means that sat here, I do enjoy a decent amount of under-thigh support even if I had a taller driver ahead of me, plus plenty of space for me to tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me. That's all well and good. We also get a center armrest, which is something I always appreciate, plus a couple of crotch coolers and another USB-C and A pairing back here to charge up devices. All very good. Now, in terms of carrying 3 abreast back here, this car isn't the widest out there, which means that a central passenger is not going to be all that comfortable, and there is a tiny little bit of a lip in the floor, which means that you will be fighting for foot space. But I think that given the fact this is a B-segment crossover, this is generally okay, and it is certainly larger than what you get from the Chery Tiggo Cross, hybrid or otherwise, but it is still less space than what you get from a Honda HR-V. But I think overall this is pretty much all right. You do get ISOFIX mounts back here, which are not that easy to locate, but you'll get there eventually. The doors don't open as wide as I'd like, which means that fitting a bulky rear-facing child seat might be a bit more of a challenge. And more importantly, you cannot fit a child seat on the front passenger seat, which means that you will have to accommodate that bulky rear-facing child seat here, which could limit the amount of space for a front passenger. Worth bearing in mind if you are a young couple looking to raise children. The other thing I'd also like to point out is this car seems to come tinted as standard, and the tint at the back is slightly darker than it is in the front. And because this car has a rising window line, smaller children will struggle to get a view out, although they can obviously look through the panoramic sunroof if you buy the flagship model. Now, Proton claims several 100,000 man-hours went into the development of this car. And of course, while a lot of that was spent on the powertrain, what I've also discovered is a lot more of that time was spent on refining the driving experience, which we will get to now. You join me in a traffic jam, somewhere between Seremban and the turn-off to the Elite motorway, because someone's decided that it would be nice if their car didn't quite work so well on the North-South highway. Now, I thought this would be a good time to talk to you because, you know, I've got the adaptive cruise control running. It's doing a pretty decent job. And so that should at least give me a little bit more headspace to explain this situation. So we've had about 24 hours in this car. I've had about 24 hours in this car where we've driven from KL to Malacca and back. Stayed in a nice hotel. We largely were left to ourselves for the schedule, which means that we had plenty of time to drive the car and actually test it out more than we normally would on a regular media drive. So that's certainly very nice. Now, there are a few things about this new X50 that I think are worth pointing out. A lot of that has to do with the biggest obvious change, which is the powertrain. As I mentioned earlier, this new 4-cylinder turbocharged engine is now more powerful and more torquey than before. The improvement is like some 8 PS and 35 Newton meters, if I'm not mistaken, or something to that effect, compared to the outgoing X50 flagship, which used the TDI engine, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but of course it's a much bigger difference compared to the previous port injection turbocharged engines that you used to get on the X50 Executive Standard and Premium. Now, the benefit of this engine having a bit more power and a bit more torque is that when you're cruising on the motorway, the engine isn't working so hard. And so we have found that even at like 110, 120 kilometers an hour, this car will generally maintain an engine speed of about 2,000, 2,200 RPM, which is low enough that the engine doesn't then create a hum or a noise that intrudes into the cabin and then ruins the serenity or the quietness within the cabin. Now, I say this because the interior of this car is now significantly quieter and more refined than before. And I say this because the X50 used to suffer from pretty shocking wind noise, especially beginning at speeds of about 90 kilometers an hour and then just progressively getting worse as the speed builds up. Whereas now, the wind noise has been very well managed, at least to the point where I feel like I can cruise at motorway speeds, or perhaps even slightly beyond when I'm for brief stints of overtaking, for example, and it still feels very resolved, very refined in this cabin. So that is a positive effect. That's a positive change. The other matter is in terms of road noise. Now, if I recall correctly, the pre-facelift X50 also used 18-inch alloys wrapped in Continental Ultra Contact tires, and so the rolling stock hasn't changed in terms of its technicalities, but clearly they have gone, or the engineers at Proton have gone some way towards improving the rolling refinement in this car, because the amount of road noise getting kicked up has been significantly reduced. It's still there, and this cabin is certainly nowhere near as quiet as that of an X70, but it is quieter than the outgoing model. And progressive improvements are something that obviously we want to see from Proton, because it means that they are taking feedback from customers and working that into product update schedules, which means that Proton is paying attention, Proton is listening, Proton cares about its customers, and is constantly trying to improve the overall perception of its products and the brand. Now, that being a benefit is very obvious, at least now that I've told you about it. The other benefit that I didn't quite expect is the fuel economy. Now, Proton has made a claim that this 4-cylinder is like 4% more efficient than the outgoing 3-cylinder, which sounds like a negligible amount. But more importantly, the outgoing 3-cylinder X50 was known for being a particularly thirsty vehicle, because especially when driven on long motorway stints, like I'm doing now, these cars will tend to do about 10-ish liters to the 100. And I'm talking about maintaining 110, 120 kilometers an hour, yeah? I'm not talking about crazy, stupid speeds. So, you know, that's not a particularly impressive number, no matter how you slice it, as particularly given that this is a car competing in sort of the 100,000 ringgit space, where you've got people who would be cross-shopping this against vehicles like, say, a Toyota Vios or a Honda City, which would do better fuel economy on a long motorway run, despite not being turbocharged. So that was a bit of a problem, and that's always been an issue that I've raised with Proton when it comes to the X50, because obviously X50 customers care a lot about fuel economy. This car is not just one that's driven on value at point of purchase, but it's also driven on value in terms of ownership. And ridiculously high fuel consumption doesn't bode well for a positive ownership experience. So what impressed me is that this car yesterday, on a clear run from KL to Malacca, again driving at your typical motorway speed, this car was averaging 7.7 liters to the 100, according to the trip computer. That is super impressive in terms of real-world fuel consumption compared to claimed figures, which are normally fibbed anyway. That looks to me like a pretty positive improvement. Now, we've driven about an hour, 20 minutes from Malacca before we got caught in this jam, and now being caught in this jam and some more traffic earlier, is now reporting 8.5 liters to the 100, which again is a very impressive figure given where this car started doing about 10 liters to the 100. That, to me, is a significant improvement. That is a big positive point for this car. And again, it shows that Proton does take the feedback that it receives from customers and members of the press, and it does work that into their product update schedule in order to fix and address the problems that customers face. The same goes for the inclusion of Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, which was something that a lot of people were not happy about, but now it's here and it's wireless, which is great. Now, of course, life in this car is not absolutely perfect, though. One of the things that Proton claims to have updated with this car is the advanced driver assist features, or ADAS functions, because they say that with some updated hardware and some slightly updated software, this system should now function smoother and more predictably than it used to. I think that it has improved over the outgoing model, but it's still not as good as what you'd get from, say, Toyota or Honda, because Toyota will use a radar-based system which provides more data and more information to the car in order to make its decision. And Honda, if I'm not mistaken, in the HR-V uses just a camera-based system, I think. Might be wrong. But those cars certainly perform better in terms of their level 2 semi-autonomy, and so it creates an environment where you're more likely to use those systems because they feel more trustworthy compared to the execution here in the X50. Now, that's one issue. The second issue is kind of minor, and it has to do with the USB ports in this car. So Proton is very proud of the fact that you get USB-A and USB-C points in this car. And so, if you're like me, you will connect your Android Auto wirelessly and then plug your phone into the USB-C port in order to keep your phone charged up. Now, for whatever reason, the USB-C port in the front of this car, despite having tested it with about 4 different cables, appears to be pitifully slow, so much so that it is unable to keep my phone charged, or even topped up for that matter, while also using wireless Android Auto, which suggests to me that the USB-C port does not have enough power being supplied to it. Now that just feels like a ridiculous oversight on Proton's part, because it's one of those things where they should have caught that before production, but alas, that's where we are. So overall, what does that mean for the X50? Ultimately, the X50 has taken its position as the #1 B-segment SUV in the country. Not just according to some local band that I don't listen to, but also according to sales figures. And so being the segment leader, this car has a reputation to defend. It's not enough to just give it some new bumpers and some new wheels and call it a day. They understand the fact that in order to maintain this position, in order to stave off competition, not just from Toyota and Honda, but also from new players, particularly from China, the X50 has to be a significantly better car with the facelift, and that's exactly what they've done. The changes in this car are tangible. It's not just the powertrain, although obviously that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but it's also the attention to details, things like the refinement, the wind noise, the road noise, even things like the choice of materials within the cabin, the way that they've also inverted the interior upholstery color scheme, putting the red further down, which also improves visibility, because a lot of owners were complaining that the red upholstery on the dash used to reflect in the windscreen. Now that's not a problem anymore. All of these things add up to a significantly improved experience. That, I think, is a takeaway here. This is a significantly improved vehicle over the outgoing car, and therefore I think that this car is entirely capable of defending its position as Malaysia's #1 B-segment crossover. The other point that I'd like to sort of extend on this is the fact that despite having added more features, despite having invested more money towards making this car better and look better and feel better and drive better, the prices haven't really moved, because at the moment there's a rebate program which Proton says will last until some arbitrary date that they haven't fully decided yet. And if you take that into account, the executive is some 8,000 ringgit cheaper than it used to be, and the premium and flagship are about 500 ringgit more affordable than before. Again, you're getting a better car with better specs and better quality for less money. Pretty sure Proton doesn't run a charity, so that is pretty good. And I'm glad that that means that, again, buyers of the X50 or potential buyers of the X50 will be enjoying an excellent value package with the new X50. And I think that when you take all of the updated changes to the car, as well as the updated changes to the value proposition, etc., I think that this car, again, has the capability to defend its position as Malaysia's #1 B-segment crossover, and it looks like it will probably stay that way for quite some time. The next generation HRV is quite some time off. The Corolla Cross has only very recently been updated, which means that we won't see a full model change for at least another 3 years. And so within this space, this is pretty alright. However, at the time of filming, Chery Auto Malaysia has announced that they are now taking bookings of the new Chery 05. Which is basically a facelifted Amoda 5, dropping the Amoda name in order to avoid confusion, which not only packs a dual-clutch automatic gearbox, throwing away the CVT, it also has a brand new rear subframe, which also throws out the torsion beam rear suspension in exchange for multi-links, which means that while you're getting all the suspension bits off of the Amoda E5, the electric model, you're getting all of this in a car with updated aesthetics, and again with the same specs and technical features that we've seen from the Chery Amoda 5 that's made it quite popular within the market. That, I think, will cause some headache for the X50 as far as buyers are concerned, and that might be a fly in the ointment for Proton, but hopefully it shouldn't be too big of a problem. In any case, we look forward to taking this car out on a full review, and maybe we might be able to do a head-to-head. Maybe, assuming Proton doesn't try to put my head on a stick. But in any case, that concludes our media preview drive of the new, updated, facelifted Proton X50. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below, including the link to join our new WhatsApp channel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care and stay safe.